So hi, my name is Josh Clark. I'm the head of school of the Bodine School in Germantown, Tennessee. Bodine is an independent school that specializes in students with dyslexia. So all of our students come to us because they share similar neurological characteristics that create an unexpected difficulty for them to read, write, and spell. So today what I want to do is kind of walk you through what we mean by the term dyslexia, what we mean by learning disabilities and some of their common characteristics associated with them, and what that could mean for our community at large, and specifically what it might mean for when we work with an individual, how to help them become better readers, writers, and spellers. So when we talk about dyslexia, what we're talking about is a specific type of learning disability that's neurological in origin. So it's not the result of brain damage, not the result of some kind of development or any kind of environmental aspect. It is a different structuring of the brain that causes, again, an unexpected difficulty in reading, writing, and spelling that may result in a secondary characteristic of poor comprehension. And let's unpack that for a minute because there's a lot of things involved there. First, the most important thing to acknowledge is that it's an unexpected difficulty. We're talking about folks that have an average to above average IQ, very intelligent. We're talking about folks who have had exposure to proper reading instruction that should, for all intents and purposes, be able to read fluently and proficiently, but cannot. We're also talking about folks who may or may not be poor comprehenders, which seems illogical because when we talk about reading, we talk about comprehension. And if I can't read, I can't comprehend. But when we think about reading, it's really a series of tasks that come together that require different neurological functions. And all these different things come together to create a competent reader. So comprehension isn't necessarily the result of the ability to decode, to look at a word and recognize it. It's actually a different neurological task associated with it. So we find folks that have a hard time with decoding, that have a hard time with spelling, who look at a letter, look at a sound, and they don't necessarily have the significance for that. That doesn't mean they can't comprehend. We know a lot of folks who are dyslexics when something's read to them, when they listen to a book orally, whatever the case may be, they comprehend at a very high level. It's just the accessing the print, being able to look at that letter, associate it with a sound, is a very difficult task for them. It's called phonological processing, the ability to associate a symbol with a sound and then draw meaning from it. That is just one task associated with reading, and for dyslexics, it's a very difficult task. It's often, again, where they fall apart in terms of their reading, their writing, and their spelling. So when we talk about dyslexia, again, we're talking about neurological learning disability, and neurological in origin, not the result of environmental effects. However, another important thing to consider is that dyslexia is only present or only important within print-based cultures. So prior to Gutenberg's printing press, there was no idea or concept of dyslexia. An individual's intellect or ability was not judged by their ability to look at print and draw meaning from it. And I think it's always important to understand, because when we're talking about these folks, they're not incapable of learning to read, they're not in any way stupid, lazy, or deficient. They just there's just a certain task that they have a very difficult time with, that it happens to be very, very important within our culture. But again, in cultures that that aren't based on alphabetic code, that aren't based on print, you would not necessarily have the same implications of dyslexia, because it wouldn't be such a valued skill or ability. At this point, there's a famous quote that I'm assuming is going to be behind me. And it's you'll see here that the subject of the sentences have been removed, and I've replaced it with the word "it." Right? So it can be mistaken for reality. It can delude people into superficial, false sense that they understand something when they've only just begun to understand it. It drifts all over the place, getting to the hands of not only those who understand it, but equally of those who have no business with it. It does not know how to address the right people and not address the wrong. And again, there I've taken out the word "it," and when I show this to folks, oftentimes we initially associate this with technology. Especially teachers are very concerned about technology, that it creates the shallow understanding, the shallow sense of learning. It's making things too easy for folks, and so on and so forth. So in that technological evolution, right, we often associate these kinds of fears with that. But what's fascinating about these quotes is actually the it that I'm referencing is not technology, it's reading. So So Socrates, the father of Western thought, was very suspicious of reading, of this idea of a literate society. He came from an oral tradition where an individual's intellect and judgment of their capacity was based upon their memorization. Could they memorize these great epics? Could they retain and then recite all of this information? That is how a person during that society was judged as intelligent. So as the alphabetic code emerged and we had this idea of being able to write these things down and gather meaning from symbols, Socrates was very concerned that it would be the end of kind of civilization, if you will. I think that's important because it puts things in context. Again, we're not talking about folks who are unable or deficient in some way. We're talking about folks that have a difficulty with a very specific task that is actually a human invention. We were not put on this planet to read. We were put on this planet to hear, to speak, to talk, to see, but not to read. Reading developed over time. It's actually a cultural invention that requires a lot of different components of our brain to come together. And for most of us, this happens in the first 5 to 7 years of life. And we're just not cognizant of it because we're so young. But it's actually a pretty miraculous process that takes course. With a dyslexic individual or an individual with a learning disability, they lack that transformation. That what seems to us natural, those brain pathways don't necessarily come together despite the exposure, despite the instruction, largely because it's not the instruction that they need and it's not the amount of exposure that they need. So again, I think it's important for us to walk away and appreciate that when we talk about reading, it's an invention. It's something that we've adapted over time, that's malleable, that changes. It's not something that's innate within us. So in theory, behind me right now is this fantastic explanation of reading, right? Where reading comes from. It has nothing to do with learning disabilities. This is just about the different tasks associated with comprehension, all the different threads that have to come together. So what you see is literally two strands that weave together, and within these strands are tinier fibers that all create these two different strands. And in the most basic sense, we're talking about language and word recognition or phonological processing. And both of these things have to come together to determine or to create a strong reader, to create comprehension. So one thing that I think is important when we're working with folks, when we're working with adults or children, whoever it may be, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different opportunities for there to be a breakdown in the reading process. Again, I return to the idea of task. What we want to do is perform a task analysis. Try to isolate where it is they're having the difficulty. Some folks will read a word and they seem fluent and they seem like they're able to decode very easily, but in reality they've memorized these things, or they're using context clues to assume what they think these words are, but they're not actually able to decode them. A great little test for that may be to create nonsense words. Give individuals a list of words, recognizable words, and then words that aren't real words but that follow a similar decoding rule. So for instance, you have cat, give them tat, T-A-T. Can they decode that just as easily as they can cat? If they can't, then we start to see that they might be memorizing these words. And you can take these on further into more complex phonograms. A-E, A-I, things of that nature. Even T-I-O-N, right? Shun, right? Are they able in isolation to recognize those particular letters make this particular sound? Again, great way to break down or get a better understanding of where they're having difficulties. You also have to consider the idea of language. Language is very complex and it's separate from this idea of dyslexia. Individuals might have a language processing disorder, might have a difficult time breaking language down. So as language comes in, their ability for them in their mind to take the syntax, break it down, understand inference, understand metaphor, all these different things that are implied and compacted into speech, into writing, is that difficult for them to understand. Do they just simply lack the background knowledge? Are you presenting them with information that has no context or relevance for them? A great example is to show a 10-year-old today a phone, a rotary phone, right? They may not recognize that as a phone if they've had no context with it. Doesn't mean that they're stupid, it just means they have no background for it. Same thing with reading. If we give individuals text that they have zero familiarity with, it might be more difficult for them to read it, to comprehend it. You also have on there under the bottom, under that word recognition, sight word recognition, and that's the ability for individuals to retrieve those high frequency frequency words. And by retrieve, it's instantaneous. They're able to look at a word and they have this orthographic imprint in their mind. They see THE, and without hesitation, without any conscious thought, they're immediately able to pull that out and say the. That's really, really important for folks, because if you're constantly stopping on those smaller high frequency words to try to decode them or try to retrieve them, you're wasting all this mental energy. So when it comes time for comprehension, you literally don't have the mental capacity to do it because you've spent so much time trying to retrieve or decode the words. A lot of these high-frequency words you're not able to decode. They don't follow any rules that make any sense. The being a great example, was, right? These words you aren't able to decode. And for someone with a learning disability, they're going to need 10 times the exposure that someone without a learning disability would need to recognize them. So, as an example, someone without a learning disability might be able to look at a word and imprint it into their mind after 200 instances. Someone with dyslexia would be closer to 2,000. And those numbers aren't exact, but the spectrum of need is, right? Someone with an LD, someone with dyslexia, they're going to need exposure over and over and over again to appreciate what they're seeing, and for, again, to become imprinted in instant in their mind. So that gives you, again, the basic idea of what it takes, very simplistic, but some understanding of what it takes to become a competent reader. And again, the biggest thing I want to stress is that task analysis. When someone's unable to comprehend, we have to back up and try to isolate and figure out where it is they're having the difficulties. It might be in all components. It might be in a very segmented component, but it's important to try to our best ability to figure out where that is and then remediate that. And again, I think another thing that's important to appreciate is that it took us 2,000 years to become competent readers, or to develop reading as a society, to develop this alphabetic code. And we expect our kids to digest this in 2,000 days. So again, after a certain point in time in the way that our educational system works, if you don't read by a certain grade or a certain age or at a certain milestone, the assumption is it's your fault. And we're going to move on, and you are just going to fall further and further behind. And again, that's an important thing to remember. It doesn't mean people aren't teachable, or because it didn't work, it's never going to work. It just means they probably need more exposure and they need more appropriate instruction than what they received initially. All right, so I know everything I just shared is very overwhelming, right? Like I mentioned, you could take literally get your PhD in learning disabilities and still not know everything. But I want to, again, encourage you all that the fact that you're attempting this, and the fact that you are taking the time to work with someone one-on-one, give them attention, and give them the reassurance that this is possible and that they can make progress is huge. It's huge. I don't want anyone to feel like because they don't have this depth of understanding that they're not going to make a difference. You are going to make a difference just by working with them, by helping them, and thinking about language differently. If you take anything else away from this, please just consider all the different parts and complexities that go into making a reader, and know that no matter what you're doing, you're contributing to at least one of those, and you're giving somebody the hope and the belief that they're not stupid, they are able, they are competent, and they just need some help. So you taking the time to do that and the energy and commitment to do that is going to ultimately be what changes our city and helps us get away from these pathetic and terrifying statistics of folks in certain neighborhoods and certain backgrounds having a difficulty learning to read because you are proving otherwise. So thanks for all you do.